The Great Hall of the Galactic Council looked like a crystal palace floating in space. Inside, hundreds of alien beings from across the galaxy sat in their seats, all talking at once. Their voices created a noise that bounced off the walls like thunder. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Kelram, belonged to a race called the Zilani, and his blue skin looked almost gray with fear. His hand shook as he held up a small device that showed moving pictures to everyone in the room. "Look at this," Kelram said, his voice breaking. 17 of our worlds are gone. It's gone. In only 3 months, these creatures we call the Devourers have turned everything into their war machines. Our cities, our people, even the dirt under our feet becomes part of their army. The pictures showed something that made even the bravest aliens in the room feel sick. Massive metal creatures that looked like giant insects, mixed with tanks, moved across planets. Where they walked, everything changed. Trees became metal. Buildings turned into weapons. Even the people who lived there were transformed into something else, something horrible. "We have tried everything we know how to try," Kelram continued. "We shot them with our most powerful plasma guns. We used weapons that could break apart atoms. Even sent our best war fleets to die fighting them. Nothing works. They learn from every attack. They get stronger every time we hurt them." An alien that looked like a giant praying mantis made clicking sounds with his mouth. This was War Master Zekron from the Hegemony, one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy. "Your people just don't know how to fight properly," he said in a voice full of disgust. "Give us the location of these Devourers. We'll show you what real warriors can do." But General Thane, a being covered in thick armor, shook his head slowly. "We already tried that, War Master. On the planet Kepler 442, we sent 3 of our biggest warships. Ships so powerful, they could destroy entire moons. The Devourers studied our weapons for 6 hours, then they turned our own technology against us. All 3 ships were destroyed, and everyone on them was converted into more Devourers." The room erupted into chaos. Some aliens wanted to send bigger armies. Others suggested they should run away to distant galaxies. A few talked about making deals with the Devourers, though nobody knew if such creatures could even understand the concept of peace. Ours passed like this. The Devourers were eating worlds faster than the Council could even talk about them. Every minute they spent arguing was another minute that innocent people were being turned into living weapons. Then something strange happened. A quiet voice cut through all the noise. "Earth will handle this." Everyone turned to look at the human section. Ambassador Kate Morrison stood up slowly. She didn't look like much compared to the other beings in the room. She was middle-aged with gray hair starting to show at her temples. She wore a simple black business suit that looked boring next to the elaborate armor and clothing of other species. Most aliens barely noticed humans at council meetings. But when Kate spoke, something in her voice made the entire chamber fall silent. "Humans," Kelram asked, and for the first time in months, hope appeared in his voice. "But your people haven't fought in a major war for almost 50 years. You're known for being peaceful traders and scientists." Kate's mouth formed what might have been a smile, but there was something cold about it, something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop a few degrees. "That's true," she said in that same quiet voice. "We've been peaceful for a long time. But peace doesn't mean we've forgotten how to handle problems like this." "Kind of problems?" asked General Thane. Kate looked around the room at all the powerful military leaders and ancient warrior races. "The kind where normal solutions don't work. Kind where you need people who understand how the worst kinds of enemies think." "You mean soldiers?" War Master Zekron clicked impatiently. "No," Kate said, and now her smile was definitely cold. "I mean specialists. People who have experience with creatures that can't be reasoned with, can't be scared, and won't stop until everything is consumed or destroyed." The room was completely quiet now. Even the background hum of the space station seemed to fade away. "What kind of specialists?" Kelram whispered. Kate gathered her papers and prepared to leave. "The kind that other humans prefer to forget exist. The kind we only use when the alternative is watching entire civilizations disappear." She walked toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one more time. "Don't worry, Ambassador Kelram. Earth has dealt with monsters before. We know exactly what to do with things that think they're unstoppable." as the doors closed behind her. The assembled aliens sat in stunned silence, wondering what they had just unleashed. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Kelrim stood at the observation deck of his space station, watching the stars through the massive windows. He had been waiting for Earth's response, hoping to see a fleet of powerful warships approaching his world. The Devourers had consumed 2 more planets, while the galaxy waited for humanity's promised help. Then he saw it. A single ship moving slowly through space, leaving a trail of glowing exhaust behind it. The vessel looked ancient and beaten up, like something that should have been scrapped years ago. Burns and scratches covered every inch of its metal hull, and parts of it were held together with what looked like emergency repairs. "This can't be right," Kelrim muttered to himself. He had expected Earth's most advanced military technology, not this floating piece of junk that barely seemed capable of staying in one piece. The ship, which had the name Redemption painted in faded letters on its side, slowly docked with the space station. Kelrim rushed to the docking bay, his heart racing with excitement and worry at the same time. Maybe the real Earth forces were inside this humble transport ship. Maybe this was just how humans traveled to avoid attracting attention. The heavy metal doors of the docking bay opened with a loud hiss. Steam poured out, and Kelrim held his breath, waiting to see Earth's finest warriors step forward. Instead, 23 humans in regular street clothes walked out. They looked like they had been picked up from random places around Earth. Some wore old jeans and t-shirts. Others had on worn-out jackets and boots. None of them were wearing uniforms or carrying visible weapons. Their leader was a woman who looked to be about 40 years old. She had brown hair that reached her shoulders and a face that most people would forget 5 minutes after meeting her. She wasn't tall or short, not particularly strong-looking or weak. In fact, everything about her seemed completely ordinary. Everything, except her eyes. When Kelrim looked into them, he felt his blue scales tighten against his skin in an instinctive fear response. Her eyes were flat and empty, like looking into deep water at night. They were the eyes of someone who had seen things that normal people never should see. "I'm Rebecca Hayes," she said, walking forward and extending her hand for him to shake. Her palm was rough with old calluses, the hands of someone who had worked hard for many years. Earth's special cultural exchange program. Kelrim shook her hand while staring at the strange group behind her. There was a huge man with dark skin, whose arms were covered in tattoos that looked like they came from street gangs. Next to him stood a thin woman with pale skin who kept looking over her shoulder, at shadows that weren't there. Another man had brown skin and black hair. But what caught Kelrim's attention was his left hand, which was clearly mechanical, made of metal and wires instead of flesh and bone. None of them looked like the professional soldiers Kelrim had expected. They looked more like people you might find in the rough parts of any city, the kind of people that police officers watched carefully. "I don't understand," Kelrim said, his voice shaking slightly. "Where are your weapons? Where is your military equipment? Your battle armor? Don't you have any plans for fighting the Devourers?" Rebecca smiled at him, but the expression was disturbing rather than comforting. The smile existed only on her mouth, while her eyes remained as cold and empty as before. "We are the weapons," she said simply. The large man with the tattoos stepped forward. "I'm Jerome Washington," he said in a deep voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Spent 18 years in maximum security prison for running organized crime. In Chicago, he learned a lot about how to control people who don't want to be controlled. He pointed to the thin woman who was still glancing nervously at empty corners. "That's Amanda Torres. She survived 3 years in a prison camp in Siberia where they tried to break her mind. Didn't work, obviously, but the experience taught her things about fear that most people never learn." The man with the mechanical hand stepped forward and flexed his metal fingers. "I'm David Chen. Lost my real hand in a factory accident, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I spent 10 years working for people who needed others to disappear quietly. I know 20 different ways to break someone's will to fight without ever laying a finger on them." Kelrim felt his throat sacs contract, a biological response his species had when facing serious danger. "What kind of soldiers are you people?" "We're not soldiers," Rebecca said, and her voice became even quieter, which somehow made it more frightening. "Soldiers fight wars according to rules. They wear uniforms and follow orders, and try to minimize damage to innocent people. She gestured to her team with one hand. We're something different. We're survivors. Each person here has faced something that tried to destroy them, break them, or turn them into something they didn't want to become. We fought back and won, but we learned things in the process that most people never have to learn. Jerome nodded slowly. See, Ambassador, you're military. People and all these warrior races in the galaxy, they think like hunters. They're used to fighting prey that runs away, or other hunters who follow the same basic rules they do. Amanda spoke for the first time, her voice so quiet, Kelram had to strain to hear her. But the Devourers aren't hunters or prey. They're something else. They're like a disease that thinks they consume everything because consuming is all they know how to do. And diseases, David added, flexing his mechanical fingers again, require a different kind of treatment than what you'd use on normal enemies. Rebecca looked directly at Kelram, and he had to fight the urge to step backwards. Every person on this ship has survived something that normal people don't survive. We've been on the receiving end of systematic cruelty, organized violence, and attempts to break our humanity. We learned how monsters think because we had to, just to stay alive. The beautiful thing about monsters, Jerome said with a grin, that didn't reach his eyes, is that they all have the same basic weakness. They can't imagine anything worse than themselves. Kelram realized he was trembling. Are you saying you're worse than the Devourers? No, Rebecca said softly. We're saying we understand them. Understanding something is the first step to stopping it. 3 days after the humans arrived, the Devourers finally came. It started with a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the world itself was vibrating. Then the sky darkened as hundreds of metallic shapes descended from orbit, moving in perfect formation like a swarm of mechanical locusts. The Galactic Defense Forces immediately sprang into action. Plasma cannons lit up the sky with bright green streaks of energy. Quantum missiles exploded in brilliant flashes that temporarily turned night into day. The alien forces fought with precision and power, using tactics that had won wars across the galaxy for thousands of years. But the humans did something strange. Instead of joining the fight, they climbed up to a hill overlooking the battle and simply sat down to watch Jerome. Washington pulled out a pair of old binoculars and studied the creatures attacking the valley below. The Devourers looked like someone had taken giant insects and crossed them with industrial machinery. Their bodies were covered in sharp metal spines, and weapon ports opened and closed along their sides like breathing. When they moved, they made a sound like grinding gears mixed with clicking claws. Look at that, said Danny Rodriguez, a stocky man with scars covering his hands and neck. His eyes had the same flat, dead look that all the humans shared. They're already changing. It took them 6 minutes to adapt to the plasma fire this time. Last planet, it took them 8. Rebecca Hayes nodded without taking her eyes off the battle. She held her own pair of binoculars and watched the Devourers with the focused attention of a scientist studying specimens. Notice something else, she said quietly. Watch what happens when the aliens actually hurt one of them. Down in the valley, a lucky shot from a quantum cannon tore through a Devourer's armor plating. The creature made a sound like metal screaming, then immediately pulled back behind cover. Within seconds, all the other Devourers in the area changed their formation to protect their wounded companion. They retreat when they get hurt, observed Amanda Torres, the thin woman who had survived the prison camps. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but everyone could hear her clearly. They're not just learning how to beat weapons, they're learning from pain. Jerome laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. That does sound familiar, doesn't it? Rebecca lowered her binoculars and turned to face her team. Everyone see what's happening down there? The alien forces are doing exactly what any professional military would do. They're using superior firepower, coordinated attacks, and proven battle strategies. It should work. But it's not working, said David Chen, flexing his mechanical hand, because they're fighting these things like they're normal enemies. Exactly! Rebecca pointed down at the valley where another group of alien soldiers was being overrun. The Devourers had already evolved a new armor that deflected the plasma weapons completely. The aliens are thinking like hunters fighting other hunters. But these Devourers aren't hunters. What are they then? Asked Tommy Briggs, a man whose file was mostly classified, but whose arms were covered with old burn scars. They're apex predators, Amanda said, her voice growing even quieter. They consume everything, because that's all they know how to do. They adapt to every attack because they expect everything to attack them. Rebecca stood up and dusted off her pants. Amanda, remember the camps? When the guards were trying to break you, how did you survive? Amanda's mouth formed what might have been a smile, but it looked more like a crack in glass. I became exactly what they expected to find. A broken prisoner who was scared of everything, and when they weren't watching carefully anymore, I became something they never expected. Which was what? Someone who understood how their minds worked better than they did? Rebecca turned to address the entire team. These devourers think like perfect predators. They expect resistance, so they evolve to overcome it. They expect fear, so they use it as a weapon. They expect their enemies to fight back in predictable ways. Jerome cracked his knuckles loudly. But predators have blind spots. What kind of blind spots? Tommy asked. Rebecca's expression became distant, like she was remembering something from long ago. They can't adapt to prey that thinks like a predator. They can't evolve past something that already understands how to become a monster, because monsters don't think like normal creatures. David nodded slowly. It's like fighting fire with fire, except we're not fighting. We're becoming something they can't understand. Something they can't predict, added Danny. Something that scares them, Amanda whispered, as the sun set behind them. The humans gathered their gear and began walking down the hill toward the battlefield. But instead of heading toward the alien forces, they disappeared into the dark forest that surrounded the valley. Where are we going? Tommy asked. Hunting. Rebecca replied simply. The next morning, the Galactic Defense Forces found something that made even their most experienced officers feel sick. 3 Devourer scouts had been found at the edge of the battlefield, but they weren't destroyed. They were carefully taken apart. Like someone had performed surgery on them while they were still alive and functioning. Their weapons had been removed piece by piece. Their adaptive systems had been surgically extracted. Most disturbing of all, their communication arrays were still working, broadcasting signals back to the main Devourer fleet. But instead of tactical information, the signals seemed to be screams of confusion and fear. General Thane stared at the dismantled creatures through his helmet's display. What kind of weapons did this? Ambassador Kelram examined the precise cuts and careful removal of components. I don't think weapons did this, General. I think the humans did this with their hands. But why would they take them apart instead of just destroying them? Kelram looked up at the hill where the humans had been watching the battle. It was empty now, but somehow that made it more frightening. I think they wanted to send a message to the rest of the Devourers, he said quietly. A message that says, there's something on this planet that understands how to hurt them in ways they can't adapt to. In the distance, more Devourer signals began broadcasting. But these weren't the usual coordination patterns. These sounded like warnings. The real war was just beginning, and for the first time since the invasion started, the Devourers were afraid. General Thane stood on the bridge of his massive warship, staring at the video feed from the planet's surface. What he saw made his stomach turn, even though he had witnessed countless battles across the galaxy. His hands gripped the edge of the control panel as he watched the humans work. This is completely barbaric, he said into his communication device, his voice shaking with anger and disgust. They're not fighting a war down there. They're torturing prisoners. This goes against every rule of civilized warfare in the galaxy. On his screens, he could see the human team moving through what had once been a Devourer command center. The massive facility was filled with the biomechanical creatures, but they weren't fighting anymore. Instead, the humans had somehow captured them and were doing things that made even hardened soldiers look away. Rebecca. Hayes stood in front of a Devourer that had been partially taken apart. The creature was still alive, its red optical sensors flickering weakly as Amanda Torres worked on the exposed wiring of its brain systems. The machine tried to move its weapons toward Rebecca, but Jerome Washington had carefully cut the connections that controlled its movement. It could see and hear everything, but it couldn't fight back. I know exactly what you are, Rebecca whispered to the creature. her voice so quiet that the microphones barely picked it up. "Da." But somehow, that quiet tone was more frightening than any shout. "You consume everything around you because consuming is the only purpose you understand. You adapt to every attack because changing is how you survive." The Devourer's sensors focused on her face, and for a moment there seemed to be something almost human in its mechanical expression. Fear, maybe, or confusion at hearing something it had never expected to hear. "But here's what you don't understand. About humans," Rebecca continued, leaning closer to the machine. "We invented systematic consumption long before you ever existed. We've been apex predators since we first learned how to make tools from rocks and sticks. We figured out how to hunt in groups, how to trap prey, how to make entire species extinct. When we needed their resources." Behind her, David Chen was working on another Devourer, but he wasn't destroying it. Instead, he had connected cables to its central processing unit and was typing commands into a portable computer. He was rewriting the creature's basic programming, teaching it new behaviors and instincts that went against everything it had been designed to do. "The difference between us and you," Rebecca said, her voice growing even softer and more terrifying, "is that we learned how to choose when to stop. We learned that consuming everything isn't always the smart choice." Amanda looked up from her work on the neural pathways. "The prison camps taught me something important," she said in her whisper-quiet voice. "If you break something in the right way, over and over again, eventually it breaks exactly how you want it to break." Tommy Briggs was working nearby on 3 Devourers that had been completely reprogrammed. Instead of trying to consume everything around them, these machines now saw other Devourers as threats that needed to be eliminated. He had turned their own adaptive abilities against them, making them evolve in directions that would destroy their own species. "My grandfather used to tell me something when I was a kid," Tommy said without looking up from his work. "He said humans are the only creatures in the universe who can commit terrible acts of destruction and then feel guilty about it afterward. That guilt is what separates us from real monsters. It's also what makes us uniquely qualified for this kind of work." As the humans continued their strange operations, the captured Devourers began sending out new kinds of signals. Instead of the usual aggressive patterns that told other machines where to attack and consume, these signals carried different messages. Fear, confusion, desperate warnings to stay away from this planet. General Thane couldn't stand watching anymore. He activated his communication system and spoke directly to Rebecca. "What exactly are you doing to those creatures?" he demanded. "This isn't warfare. This is something else entirely."
Ow.
Rebecca slowly turned to face the camera that was recording. Everything. For just a moment, the mask of ordinary humanity slipped from her face, and General Thane saw something underneath that made him take an involuntary step backward. Behind her unremarkable features was something ancient and patient and absolutely ruthless. "We're showing them what it feels like to be preyed," she said in that same quiet, terrifying voice. "Every single person in this room has survived something that was designed to break them completely. Prison camps, organized crime, systematic torture, experiments that weren't supposed to leave survivors. We've all been on the receiving end of what happens when apex predators decide to hunt." Jerome nodded without looking up from his own work. "The beautiful thing about surviving that kind of experience is that you learn exactly how the predator's mind works. You understand their weaknesses better than they do. And once you understand how a monster thinks," David added, while his fingers flew across his keyboard, "you can become something that scares the monster." Amanda's smile was like looking at broken glass, catching light. "We're not trying to destroy them the way your military would. We're teaching them that there are worse things in the universe than being consumed. We're teaching them fear," Danny Rodriguez said simply. "Real, bone-deep terror of what might happen to them if they don't run away and never come back." The captured Devourers were now broadcasting continuously, sending panic signals across their entire network. The messages were simple, but effective. There was something on this planet that understood how to break unbreakable things, how to hunt the unhuntable, how to make apex predators into prey. Rebecca looked directly into General Thane's camera one more time. Every human on this team knows what it feels like to have something try to destroy their mind, their body, and their soul. The difference between us and these machines is that we chose to survive instead of breaking." She paused, and her ordinary face became something that would haunt General Thane's dreams for years to come. "We're teaching them what we learned about breaking." 1 week after the humans began their psychological campaign, something unprecedented happened across the galaxy. The massive Devourer fleet, which had been systematically consuming worlds for months, suddenly stopped its advance. Then, without any warning or apparent reason, the entire armada began retreating from Zalani space. But this wasn't the organized, tactical withdrawal that military experts might expect from a sophisticated enemy. The Devourers fled in complete panic, scattering in random directions like frightened animals. Their communication networks, which had always been perfectly coordinated, now broadcast nothing but desperate warning signals. Ambassador Kelrim stood at his observation deck, watching the human transport ship prepare to leave. The old beaten-up vessel that had arrived just a week ago was now preparing to depart, its mission apparently complete. Kelrim felt a strange mixture of overwhelming gratitude and deep, instinctive fear. As Rebecca Hayes walked toward the airlock that would take her back to the ship, Kelrim hurried to catch up with her. He had to know how 23 humans in civilian clothes had accomplished what the entire Galactic Defense Force couldn't manage. "Wait," he called out. "Please, I have to ask, how did you do it? How did your small team succeed where our entire military failed? We had thousands of ships, weapons that could destroy planets, soldiers who had won wars across the galaxy, but none of it worked against the Devourers." Rebecca stopped and turned to face him. She was carrying a simple cloth bag over her shoulder, the same unremarkable luggage she had brought when she arrived. Everything about her still looked completely ordinary, except for those flat, empty eyes. "The Devourers were perfect predators," she said in her quiet voice. "They had evolved to consume everything and adapt to any threat, but they had never encountered something that could think like prey and predator at the same time." She adjusted the strap of her bag and continued, "Every person on my team survived systematic attempts to destroy them. Prison camps designed to break minds. Criminal organizations that used torture as a business tool. Wars where civilians were targeted specifically to cause psychological damage. We've all been on the receiving end of what apex predators can do to their victims." Kelrim's throat sacs contracted as he processed this information. "But you're still human. You're still good people. You saved my entire species from extinction, did we?" Jerome Washington asked as he emerged from the ship's interior. The large man pointed toward the tactical displays that showed Devourer fleets fleeing in terror across multiple star systems. "Or did we just demonstrate to the entire galaxy what happens when Earth decides to stop being the peaceful neighbor?" Amanda Torres appeared next, carrying equipment that Kelrim couldn't identify, but somehow looked disturbing just by existing. Her broken glass smile was as unsettling as always. The wonderful thing about psychological warfare is how it spreads like a disease. Those Devourers will never look at organic life the same way again. Every time they encounter any biological species, they'll wonder if it might be human. They'll see potential threats everywhere. David Chen nodded as he walked past his mechanical hand gleaming under the station's lights. "Fear is the most adaptable trait in the universe. We didn't destroy the Devourers in the traditional sense. Instead, we evolved them. We made them afraid of what they might become if they continued their expansion into human territory." Tommy Briggs was the last to emerge, carrying a case that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "The beautiful part is that we taught them this lesson using their own adaptive abilities. Now every time they try to consume something, they'll remember what it felt like to be consumed themselves." As the old transport ship powered up its engines, Rebecca turned back to face Kelrim. One final time, the sound of the engines warming up created a low rumble that seemed to make the entire station vibrate. "Your people sent a distress call asking for help against monsters," she said, and her voice was somehow even quieter than usual. "Earth responded by sending the only humans who were qualified for the job, the ones who survived becoming monsters. Ourselves, but chose to stop before we became something irredeemable. What do you mean? Kelrim whispered. You mean that every person on this team knows exactly what it feels like to have something try to break them completely. The difference between us and real monsters is that we decided to use that knowledge to protect others instead of hurt them. The ship began to move away from the docking bay, and Rebecca's voice faded as the distance increased. The most dangerous. Humans aren't the ones who never experienced darkness. They're the ones who stared into it, survived it, and chose to become guardians instead of predators. As the ship disappeared into the void between stars, reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Other species had monitored the entire operation, and now they had questions. Uncomfortable questions about their human allies and what other capabilities Earth might be hiding. Back on Earth, Ambassador Kate Morrison found herself fielding nervous inquiries from the Galactic Council. Species that had previously treated humans as junior partners in galactic affairs were now speaking with a new tone of cautious respect. I'm confused about the nature of your recent military operation, one alien diplomat transmitted. Were those actually your soldiers? Kate's smile was as cold as winter starlight. Oh heavens, no. Those were just volunteers from our civilian rehabilitation programs. People were helping recover from various traumatic experiences in their past. The alien delegate's voice became even more nervous. Rehabilitation programs. Yes, we have. Extensive systems for helping people who have survived terrible experiences. Wars, crimes, systematic oppression, psychological experiments. We've learned that the best way to heal from trauma is to use that experience to help protect others. There was a long pause before the next question came. And your actual military forces? Kate's smile became something that made experienced diplomats across the galaxy feel suddenly cold. Oh, would you like a demonstration? The questions stopped coming after that. But across the galaxy, in the dark places where real monsters made their plans, new whispers began spreading through criminal networks and predatory species. The humans were no longer seen as the peaceful traders and scientists they had pretended to be. Now everyone knew the truth. Earth was inhabited by survivors who understood exactly how monsters thought, because they had survived monsters. And they had chosen to become protectors instead of predators, which somehow made them more terrifying than any traditional enemy. The devourers continued fleeing into the deepest parts of space, carrying with them a new understanding. They were no longer the apex predators of the universe. They had met something that knew how to break unbreakable things, and they never wanted to encounter it again.